Forget everything you think you know about the Abraham Accords framework and what Gulf normalization means for regional stability. What happened at Jebel Ali and the port of Fujairah within hours of the normalization ceremony was not a coincidence, not a rogue operation, and not an intelligence failure. It was a precisely timed strategic communication delivered in the only language that certain actors in this region have concluded is actually received. Three separate explosions at Jebel Ali, the largest port in the Middle East and the ninth busiest container facility in the world, and a simultaneous infrastructure attack at the Fujairah oil terminal destroyed an estimated 700,000 barrels of petroleum storage capacity, disabled two container gantry cranes serving deep-water berths, and set fire to the Eastern Fuel Depot complex. Having spent decades in military intelligence and having analyzed the strategic logic of adversarial timing operations throughout my professional career, I can tell you with absolute certainty that what the UAE government experienced in those hours was a masterclass in the application of coercive pressure through kinetic demonstration OI, and the entity responsible had been planning this specific timing for months. Let me walk you through exactly why the timing was not incidental, but was the entire strategic point. The normalization agreement between the UAE and the relevant regional party that the ceremony celebrated represented, in the eyes of certain actors in this region, a fundamental realignment of Gulf geopolitics that threatens their strategic position in ways that diplomatic protest and economic pressure have failed to reverse. Every previous iteration of the normalization architecture, the Abraham Accords, the subsequent expansion of Gulf-Israeli diplomatic engagement, the growing security and intelligence cooperation between UAE and Israeli entities, had been opposed through political channels, through proxy messaging, and through calibrated shows of force that remained below the threshold of direct attribution. The calculation that was made in the operational planning that preceded this attack was that calibrated but deniable responses were no longer producing the strategic friction necessary to prevent normalization from consolidating into something irreversible. A more direct demonstration was required, and the timing within hours of the ceremony was chosen specifically to make the message impossible to misread. The execution relied on a combination of attack vectors that reflect significant operational planning and capability development. The investigation into the attack vectors is ongoing and attribution is contested, but the technical signatures documented in the immediate aftermath tell a coherent story. At Jebel Ali, the primary destruction was accomplished through a combination of maritime drone attacks against berthed vessels and waterline infrastructure combined with aerial loitering munitions that struck the fuel storage complex from the landward approach vector. The maritime drones used were consistent in size and approach profile with systems previously attributed to Houthi operations in the Red Sea, but the guidance precision demonstrated, targeting specific berths and storage tanks rather than the general port area, significantly exceeds what Houthi operations in that theater had previously demonstrated. Either the Houthi capability has advanced substantially since their Red Sea operations, or the operational planning and technical support for this specific operation came from an entity with considerably greater capability. Stay with me because the Fujairah dimension of this attack contains the element that most directly threatens the global economy and has received the least analytical attention. Fujairah occupies a position in global energy logistics that makes it uniquely vulnerable and uniquely valuable simultaneously. Located on the eastern coast of the UAE on the Gulf of Oman rather than the Persian Gulf, Fujairah was developed specifically as a strategic alternative to Strait of Hormuz transit dependency. If the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which approximately 20% of all globally traded petroleum transits, were ever to be closed by Iranian action, Fujairah's storage and offshore loading facilities provide the primary physical mechanism for maintaining some degree of Gulf petroleum export capacity. The Trans-Arabian Pipeline, known as the Abu Dhabi Crude Oil Pipeline, terminates at Fujairah and can move approximately 1.5 million barrels per day from the Abu Dhabi interior to Fujairah's offshore loading platforms, bypassing Hormuz entirely. Fujairah's strategic value is precisely its role as the Hormuz bypass node. The attack on Fujairah's fuel terminal was therefore not an attack on a petroleum storage facility in the generic sense. It was a targeted strike against the physical infrastructure of the Hormuz bypass. Whoever conducted this attack understands Gulf energy logistics at the operational planning level. They chose Fujairah not because it was convenient, but because it was the node whose disruption most directly undercuts the argument that Gulf petroleum exports can remain secure even if Hormuz comes under threat. The message to energy markets, to the Asian economies most dependent on Gulf petroleum, and to the American planners who have relied on Fujairah as a Hormuz contingency option, was precise and unambiguous. Before we go any further, I need you to understand what the market impact of this attack means for the global economic architecture and why the timing relative to the normalization ceremony amplifies every dimension of that impact. Brent crude prices moved 8.4% in the 20 minutes following confirmation of the Fujairah attack reaching energy trading platforms. That is not a routine volatility event. An 8% intraday price movement in the global petroleum benchmark within a 20-minute window represents a market assessment that the probability distribution of future supply disruption has shifted fundamentally, not that a temporary disruption has occurred. Traders are not pricing in the barrels of storage capacity destroyed at Fujairah. Those barrels are replaceable within weeks from existing production and alternative terminals. Traders are pricing in the demonstration that the physical infrastructure of the Hormuz bypass is itself targetable by entities with means, motive, and apparent willingness to employ those means in direct response to political events. That changes the risk premium on Gulf oil supply in ways that do not normalize quickly. Keep watching because the consequence cascade from this attack runs through the UAE's own strategic position in ways that will force decisions the UAE government has been trying to avoid. What the mainstream media will not tell you is that the UAE finds itself in the most uncomfortable strategic position in its history as a result of what happened in those hours after the ceremony. The normalization commitment reflected a long-term assessment by UAE leadership that security, economic, and technological partnership with Israel offered benefits that outweighed the risks of regional political opposition. That calculation was made with full awareness that it would be opposed by Iran and Iran-aligned actors. What UAE leadership's private risk assessment apparently did not adequately weight was the speed and directness with which that opposition would translate into kinetic action against UAE infrastructure, and specifically against the most economically critical infrastructure the UAE operates. The UAE model of governance rests on an implicit social contract in which the ruling family delivers stability, security, and economic prosperity in exchange for political authority. The explosions at Jebel Ali and Fujairah struck at the physical foundation of that implicit contract. Jebel Ali generates approximately 25% of UAE non-oil GDP through its role as the re-export hub for the entire Gulf region. A prolonged disruption of Jebel Ali's operations does not just reduce UAE government revenue. It affects the livelihoods of the expatriate workforce that constitutes 88% of the UAE population and whose continued presence and productivity depends on the UAE maintaining its position as the commercial hub of the Gulf. The normalization agreement gained something. The attack may have cost something more immediately tangible. Here is what actually happened behind closed doors in the emergency meetings convened by UAE leadership in the hours following the attack. The question on the table was not simply operational. How do we secure our ports and restore operational capacity? The question was strategic. Does the normalization commitment survive this attack? And if so, at what cost to UAE strategic interests and at what risk of continued escalation? The United States was on the phone within hours. American commitment to UAE security is treaty level, and CENTCOM has assets in the region whose employment in UAE defense is automatic under existing arrangements. But the UAE leadership asking those questions already knows that American security guarantees address direct military attack. They do not automatically address the sub-military coercive toolkit that has now been demonstrably applied against UAE economic infrastructure. You think you have heard the worst of it. You have not even close. The global shipping dimension of the Jebel Ali attack extends far beyond Gulf regional logistics. Jebel Ali's operator, DP World, handles port infrastructure across 78 countries on 6 continents. The management systems, the supply chain integration, the financial settlement architecture that flows through Jebel Ali connects to essentially every major global shipping route. A successful infrastructure attack on Jebel Ali is not merely a UAE economic problem. It is a demonstration that the physical infrastructure of global supply chain logistics, in its most concentrated node in the entire Middle East and South Asian region, is vulnerable to coordinated, multi-vector attack on politically significant dates. Every global logistics operator and every shipping insurance underwriter will be incorporating this demonstration into their risk models. The insurance premium increases already beginning to affect vessels. Calling at Gulf ports will impose costs that cascade through every consumer economy that depends on Gulf origin goods or Gulf transiting supply chains. This is not just about the UAE. This is about the physical architecture of globalized commerce and whether the assumption that major hub ports in politically contested regions can be protected against the level of coordinated attack that was demonstrated has survived the events of the past 72 hours. The honest answer is that it has not. I have watched patterns like this play out across my career. An adversary with a demonstrable capability, a clearly articulated grievance, and a political window in which demonstration serves multiple simultaneous purposes is a predictable actor even when the specific timing is not anticipated. What was demonstrated at Jebel Ali and Fujairah will be repeated if the political conditions that motivated it persist. The normalization commitment either continues and accepts the ongoing coercive pressure it has now demonstrably attracted, or it moderates in ways that relieve that pressure but concedes something to the coercive logic that produced the attack. Both paths carry costs that the UAE government, the American administration, and the international community invested in Gulf stability are now being forced to assess in real time. The decisions being made right now will determine the trajectory of Gulf political order for a decade. The clock is running. What happens in the next 48 hours will clarify which path Gulf geopolitics has chosen. Stay informed. Stay skeptical of any framing that presents what happened as isolated rather than as the opening sequence of a deliberate coercive campaign with clear political objectives and demonstrated capacity to impose real costs.